mynews.studio.
This morning, doctors across Europe received permission to prescribe a drug that actually slows Alzheimer's. So, how did we reach this point, and who stands to benefit most?
Today's date is June 3, 2025. Europe's approval of Leqembi, also known as lecanemab, marks the first time the European Union has authorized a drug that targets the root cause of Alzheimer's. That's significant because, until now, treatments have only addressed the symptoms, not what drives the disease itself.
Right, Leqembi is a monoclonal antibody. It binds to amyloid beta protofibrils. Those are toxic clusters of protein in the brain tied to Alzheimer's progression. By clearing these clusters, the drug is trying to slow the disease itself, not just hide the symptoms.
And the clinical trial results are pretty revealing. Over an 18-month period, patients given Leqembi showed a 31% slower cognitive decline compared to those on a placebo. But, just to be clear, this isn't a cure. It's the first real evidence we have that the course of Alzheimer's can actually be altered, at least in the early stages.
But it's important to point out, not every Alzheimer's patient will be eligible. The approval is just for adults with mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia due to Alzheimer's. And even then, only for people who are non-carriers or heterozygotes of the ApoE4 gene, and whose amyloid pathology has been confirmed. Why such tight restrictions?
A lot of it comes down to safety. Certain genetic groups face a higher risk of side effects, things like swelling or bleeding in the brain. That's why ongoing MRI scans are required while patients are on Leqembi. This isn't a simple, one-size-fits-all medication.
And those requirements mean real challenges for hospitals. To prescribe Leqembi, doctors need access to genetic testing, confirmation of amyloid pathology, usually with a PET scan, and enough MRI capacity to keep monitoring patients. None of that is straightforward or cheap.
So how might healthcare systems respond? One likely answer is specialized memory clinics, where the genetic screening, imaging, and follow-up can all be handled in one place. But does that mean only people living near large hospitals will be able to get this treatment?
That's a real possibility, and it raises equity concerns. Alzheimer's advocacy organizations are already calling for more education and support so that access doesn't become even more uneven. Meanwhile, researchers are working on blood-based tests for Alzheimer's that could diagnose and track the disease using just a blood sample, with about 90% accuracy.
If those blood tests are reliable for different populations, could they actually bring diagnosis to rural areas or countries with fewer resources? That's the hope. But so far, most of the validation has come from wealthier countries. Ongoing international studies are trying to check how well these tests work across various groups and healthcare settings.
It's also worth noting, Leqembi is already approved in places like the US and Japan. But even there, with all the eligibility checks and monitoring, only a fraction of patients actually get the drug.
So yes, this is a milestone, Europe's first real disease-modifying therapy for Alzheimer's. But it's not the final answer. The effect depends on things like healthcare infrastructure, insurance coverage, and whether blood-based tests can be rolled out at scale. Will future treatments become easier to access, or will the same barriers remain?
And with the world's population aging and dementia cases projected to triple by 2050, these questions are only going to get more urgent. Today's approval moves things forward, but it also shows how much further innovation is needed, not just in science, but in healthcare delivery.
So to sum up, Leqembi is a sign of progress for slowing Alzheimer's in certain patients, and Europe's authorization is a major development. But there are still big gaps in access. Blood tests for early diagnosis could make a huge difference, but they're not fully validated yet.
That wraps up today's episode. This breakthrough is just the beginning. The real challenge will be making sure that progress actually reaches patients everywhere.
Thank you for listening. This episode was brought to you by mynews.studio. You can try it now for free.